Hello again. Somebody asked on here the other day what I regard as the most extreme example of historical misunderstanding. There are a number of contenders for this, but the Battle of the Somme in 1916 must be pretty near the top of the list. Today we speak of the Somme as the epitome of pointless slaughter and view Field Marshal Haig as a heartless butcher who needlessly sacrificed the lives of many young soldiers during the First World War. For anybody under the age of 60 or 70, this is the accepted perspective, and they find it hard to believe that things could ever have been seen any differently. British soldiers who actually fought in the First World War were by and large enormously fond of Haig. His funeral in 1928 was the occasion for an outpouring of national grief on a scale not seen again until the death of Princess Diana in 1997. 1 million people, many of them former soldiers, filed past his coffin in silent tribute after his death. The name Douglas was very popular in the 1920s as old soldiers named their children after their beloved Commander-in-Chief. For the British, he was the great hero of the First World War. My own grandfather, who fought at the Somme, had a picture of Haig which he used to place on the mantelpiece every Armistice Day along with a poppy till he died in 1974. Like most soldiers from that time, he would not hear a word spoken against Haig. It wasn't really until 1961 that the modern view began to emerge of both Field Marshal Haig and the Battle of the Somme, with a book called The Donkeys, written by a young man called Alan Clark. A musical called Oh What a Lovely War, heavily influenced by the book, was then produced. It was turned into a very, very popular film. This film showed Haig as an incompetent fool. Nobody had really felt like that about him until the 1960s, but this was a time when old idols were being thrown down and the trashing of Haig's reputation fitted into the mood of the time. With the making of the situation comedy Blackadder on British television 20 years later, it reinforced the same ideas about Haig and the battles of the First World War, and so opinions in Britain really became set in stone. No aspect of this legend was more significant than the Battle of the Somme, which was supposed to symbolise all the useless waste of life, as well as the callousness of senior officers like Field Marshal Haig. Since few people actually know about the Somme, it's always been easy for this myth to flourish. The first day of the Somme has been held up as a dreadful example of the slaughter seen during the First World War. I mean, just imagine 19,240 British soldiers killed on one single day. This symbolised what was possible with mechanised warfare, machine guns, modern artillery, killing on an industrial scale. This is, of course, all nonsense to anybody that knows anything about warfare. There was nothing at all exceptional about such a casualty toll. We need only to cast our minds back 100 years earlier to the 18th of June 1815 and the Battle of Waterloo. On that single day, 25,000 French soldiers were killed, and they were killed just by muzzle-loading muskets and old cannons. War's a dreadful business, but the Somme was not noticeably worse than many other aspects of war over the centuries. What did the Battle of the Somme achieve? In the Blackadder television comedy, the character played by Rowan Atkinson says that Haig is making a gargantuan effort to move his drinks cabinet 6 inches further towards Berlin. This is funny, but I mean, what's the truth of the matter? The Germans had launched an attack on the French fortress at Verdun, and they were putting all their power into this attack in what they thought would be a devastating push which would break the deadlock on the Western Front. In fact, when the fighting had ended, of which the Battle of the Somme was a large part, followed on from the attack on the Verdun. The German army had been forced to retreat 7 miles and reform their trenches that far back. This in itself was a terrible blow to German morale. The Prussian army was a body of professional fighting men, widely viewed as the best in Europe, whereas the British army, by comparison, was a ragtag assortment of clerks, bricklayers, shop assistants, farm workers and all kinds of other people who had joined up in 1914 and 1915. The Kaiser called them a contemptible little army, but this contemptible army was so ferocious that the best the Germans could do was to hang on and fight a defensive war against them. It brought home to Germany, after the Battle of the Somme, that they could never beat Britain, which was backed by the greatest empire the world had ever known. The best they could do was to fight a defensive war against such a formidable enemy. A member of the German General Staff remarked at the time that the Somme was the muddy grave of the German field army. The Germans knew very well that the Somme had not been a defeat for the British army at all. Once it was realised by the Germans they could not beat the British on the battlefield, the lesson which the Battle of the Somme taught them, they resolved on another method. They would blockade the British Isles and prevent food and supplies being brought in from other parts of the world. This was to be done by a policy of unrestricted submarine warfare in which ships from any nation heading towards Britain were liable to be sunk. This policy brought Germany into direct confrontation with the United States, who were not about to tolerate anybody attacking their civilian vessels. Once this happened, America entered the war against Germany and its defeat became inevitable. The Somme was therefore a strategic victory in that it ultimately brought about the defeat of Germany. It seems to me appropriate on Armistice Day to think about the extent to which Field Marshal Haig has been maligned over the last 60 years or so, and to hope that history will be a little more kind to him in the future.